two, hello. Check. Check two, hello. Hey folks. That's right, I'm wearing my professional journalist outfit. We got some serious people coming through today, okay? I'm dressing up in my actual journalist outfit. Not looking like a slob. Alright? When it's just you. When it's just chat. Zero care. I just look like just a big piece of shit. Just whatever happens to be lying on the floor. No effort into the appearance. Today we're getting down to serious business. We're doing a serious political interview in 13 minutes from now. No fun. So, thank you, Spooky. Thank you for complimenting my mullet. I think I need to go get it cleaned up a little bit. Just make it a little bit more business in the front. If I take it now and I make it a little bit more business in the front, then I think we're talking. Then we're cooking with gas. So, folks, in 12 minutes, I'm talking to Sarah JAMA. She's a member of provincial parliament in Hamilton, Ontario. We've talked a little bit about, what she's been going through over the last couple of months. In the days following October 7th, she put out what I saw as a really smart and empathetic statement about what was happening in Israel, Palestine, that was grounded in a historical context, that didn't immediately repeat every single talking point that we're used to hearing our political figures repeat in moments like that, and that kicked off, I think, probably what I imagine was a really crazy last few months for Sarah. And without getting too into the details, we can let her fill in the blanks on that. And talk a little bit about what the last few months have been like. Her new status as an independent MPP. And remember we're going to be normal. Just can't stress this enough. We can't stress this enough. We're all going to be totally normal. And we're going to do everything in our power to make sure this is a good experience for everyone involved. I know I don't need to remind you. I'm just putting that out there. I'm going to a big stain on my pants. Spilled some sandwich condiments. Wearing the Be Normal flannel. That's right. Exactly. So let's just set this up here.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Can you wear the balaclava but play it straight? That would be an interesting approach. That would be an interesting approach. You're kind of a journalistic power move. Dimitri, thanks for the 300 bits. I was showing my son a little bit of our Helldivers mission stuff that we were doing the other day, and he thought it was very funny when you were killed on the way to the escape pod, the escape shuttle. And I said, Dimitri! He thought that was very funny. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. Where is what I want? You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. Sunny Sola, thanks for 4 gifted subs. Thank you, Sunny Sola. I really appreciate that. What a way to get started here. I let him know all about it, Dimitri. He was pretty enthralled by the whole thing.
Hey everyone, it's Sarah JAMA here. Queen's Park is back in session on February 20th, and so am I. Thanks to your support, I've been able to get right back to work here in Hamilton Center with a
Well, turning that off. Good. Off.
Hey everyone, it's Sarah JAMA here. Queen's Park is back in session on February 20th, and so am I. Thanks to your support, I've been able to get right back to work here in Hamilton Center with a new vision for this riding and a newly formed independent constituency association. In the last year, I've been on the ground connecting with community members directly, and here's what I've heard from you in terms of priorities. I've heard that disability benefits are just not enough to meet the soaring cost of rent in this province. So I'm going to be putting forward a motion to tie the housing benefit to the average rent in your city. I also want to make changes so that your benefits are not reduced just because you got married. And sticking with housing, I'm going to be working very closely with organizations like Acorn Hamilton to take on the Landlord-Tenant Board. I want to make sure that it's set up to serve everyday people. And we know that 60% of Hamilton Center community members are renters, so I have every intention to prioritize this fight for rent control. A strong, well-funded public healthcare system is also a priority. It's essential to make sure that we have a thriving community. I'm fighting against the privatization of our healthcare system and working with local organizations to make sure that healthcare workers are paid fairly and supported in our community. And lastly, I'll be working with Environment Hamilton to table motions addressing air quality in our riding. These issues don't just affect Hamilton Center, they affect residents across Ontario. So if you're listening to what I'm saying right now and you want to stay up to date and involved with what we're doing in our new Hamilton Center office, sign up to our newsletter at sarahjama.ca. And remember, while I may be censored, I'm not silenced, and together we can make our voices heard. I'll see everybody at Queen's Park.
Okay. Tweeted. And yeah, so spooky from your comment a few moments ago. I'll tell you what we're not going to do. Okay. I'll tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to talk about that subject. Okay. That's not appropriate. That's not something that. That's not something we're going to be discussing. All right. No more horsing around, folks. Okay, we're being serious here. I put on my serious journalist outfit, so chat can put on their serious chatters outfit. Whatever you want to call it. Anyway, should be very interesting. Given the events of the last few months, I've been like, I reached out to Sarah like shortly after all that happened. And we've been just trying to find a time to talk since then. So I'm really happy that we could finally work it out. I'm really interested to hear her perspective of everything that's gone down over the last few months. Can I still be in pajamas? Yeah, you're allowed to still be in pajamas, okay? You were allowed to still be in pajamas. Not me. I had to physically look the part here today. You were allowed. But you just have to be normal. I didn't know we were supposed to dress up. Well, I did send out a memo. I did send out a memo to the super secret tier of the Triangle community. Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to mention that. Just forget I said anything. Forget I said anything, actually. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to turn off the alerts so no one interrupts this with any weird stuff. So Sarah should be joining us in just a moment. It's on a need-to-know basis. Thank you. I have a question. This is probably not the question I should be asking like 1 minute before I start this thing. I'm not going to make any big changes right now. But you know what I was thinking? Would this be... Chat, tell me if this would be crazy, okay? Tell me if this would be crazy after doing the show for 4 years. What if instead of looking like here, like how I'm doing now, what if I was like this? What if I was talking to you like this, chat? Would that be weird? Is it weird for you? If I did like from this angle, and then we went down here, and I was like over here. Is it weird? Okay. We're not going to worry about this right now, okay? I just thought maybe it was something I could take a look at. That's all. That's all. According to Diaries of a CEO, you get the best engagement when you stare directly into the camera. I guess so. You gotta force this upon us till we're used to it, like the new Discord. I honestly do not really understand how the Discord works now. Maybe I'll get used to it. I don't know. So okay, you click on the different things and there's just a bunch of different subjects and threads within. It's weird how it then opens up another column, though. Isn't that weird? You need to assert dominance of the chat with intense eye contact. Dabo84, thanks for the 10 months of Prime. Anyways, folks, let's talk to Sarah JAMA. She's come to talk to us right now. I'm very excited. I think this is going to be fantastic. Here we go. Hello, Sarah, you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You can't see me because my video is being used by Twitch. Is that going to be okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to have you on here. We've been going back and forth for a couple of weeks now about trying to find a time. So I'm really thankful that we could work it out. This is really cool. I'm happy you could do this.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time on Twitch. Hey, y'all.
Wow.
So I'm sorry about the lack of decoration in my Queen's Park office. I hate this place, so I haven't really invested much of personality into it. That's why it's beige.
That's okay. It's the new office, right?
It's the same office. They didn't evict me from it.
Oh, okay.
I'm surrounded by a bunch of my former colleagues.
Oh,
I am.
okay.
But it's
Yes.
the only accessible office in the whole of Queen's Park.
Okay. So, well, how was it going back with this new session?
It wasn't as awkward as I thought it would be. I thought it would be much more awkward. I think it's been okay so far. I was able to table my 2 motions on reforming social assistance in Ontario. The hallway conversations weren't as bad as I thought they would be. So,
okay, good. Well, listen, Sarah, I want to talk about sort of the events of the last couple of weeks. I know you've been through a lot over the last little while, and I really want to get your perspective on that. I do have a number of viewers that tune into this program from America, from Europe, and different places around the world. So I was wondering, just to sort of set the stage here, do you want to just maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got involved in politics and how you became an MPP, and then we can kind of get into what's been going on the last couple of weeks.
Sounds good. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah JAMA. I was elected in a by-election to serve Hamilton Centre in March of 2023, so almost a year ago, with the New Democratic Party. Prior to that, I was an organizer in Hamilton, Ontario, focused predominantly on issues of disability justice and anti-Black racism in my community. I started off as an organizer when I was president of the McMaster Womanists on my local campus, took on carding in my community and anti-police violence, and then moved into disability justice work. I started the first Disability Justice Network of Ontario, which was youth-led, and worked to basically teach disabled youth how to organize in our communities, because I felt that disabled youth were often left out of political spaces. We're taught to ask for help instead of create the worlds or demand the worlds that we want to see and that we believe we belong in. So teaching a lot of those organizing skills to youth. I also co-managed the successful campaign of the first woman of color in my city, Councillor Narinder Nan. So I think I've done a pretty okay job at being in community work, but also politically adjacent to Big P politics. And when Andrea Horvath, who was the leader of the NDP, stepped down from her Hamilton Centre seat to run for mayor, my friends and I signed up about 600 new members to the NDP within a couple weeks so that I could run for the nomination and take that seat. And I got elected shortly thereafter. That's who I am. Did you want me to continue and talk about?
No, that's great. That's a great way to set the stage. I guess I was wondering, before we get into the last couple of weeks, as someone that's focused on the disability justice and police violence, systemic racism, and these kinds of subjects, which I know are really important to a lot of people in Hamilton and around the country. How have you found, prior to these events, working within that system, within the NDP, do you think the NDP has been a good vehicle for being able to talk about these issues frankly and kind of suggesting reforms or having a critique? How has been your experience with working within the NDP to talk about this stuff up until October?
I think that's always been the question. Can you make change from within the system? We know that the system is broken. It's not fixable from the inside, but I think what I was interested in was experimenting to see if it's possible for organizers to genuinely be represented in political spaces in a Canadian sense. The Canadian system is it's very different from other systems, and the left-wing parties that we find ourselves interacting with in Canada are very different from parties that say they're left-wing across the world. I think I was hoping that there would be room to do things a little bit differently, stick to principle while also pushing for major change. I think to enter political spaces in general, you're asked to give up parts of yourself, to adhere to a sort of culture and decorum that is never explicitly stated. So I find that I have broken, even before the censure, I know we're going to get into it, but I have been told I broke so many rules of decorum that were never really written down. You have to bow at a certain time to a speaker, or you're not allowed to swear when you're speaking. Your press releases have to look a certain way. You're supposed to wear blazers. I think I'm one of the few people who don't during question period very often. You're just supposed to adhere to a certain way of speaking and operating immediately out the gate when you're elected here, and nobody really hands you a rule book. And then you get looked at sideways when you don't really operate that way. So I think there was a huge culture shock, just even outside of the NDP, like in general, as soon as I was elected, because the things that people valued, like I won every poll in my riding, in the leader's riding, the leader of the party, and I'm someone with a very different politic from the former leader of the NDP, Andrew Horwath, who I replaced, and I still won every poll. Like, I think folks were excited to volunteer, to donate, to get involved in my campaign. So to have that celebrated during the campaign period, but then to be elected and scolded or feeling this unspoken pressure to follow a culture that nobody was explaining directly or willing to change was very strange. And then with the NDP, I think that culture definitely does exist too. I think one of the things that I learned from talking with Jeremy Corbyn was that the UK Labour Party at least has mechanisms for dissent within the party structure, for caucus members to disagree with each other and have difficult conversations that are explicitly stated, and then an appeal process for when things go wrong or when people are kicked out. There's processes to follow. Everything in the political space in Ontario operates through unwritten rules, and I think the NDP operates that way too. There are a lot of rules in terms of how you should function as a member of the team that aren't explicitly stated, and there's nothing to fall on in terms of rules when there are disagreements. So I think things that would need to change are those sort of internal mechanisms that just don't exist, because it's kind of like operating as a fish out of water. That's how I felt after I got elected.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I think there's a lot of people around this country, activists or whoever else, just any people that pay attention to this stuff, that is really looking for people to use their political platform to really speak unapologetically about certain issues, whether it's the police, racism, housing, or Israel-Palestine or anything like that. I mean, you mentioned Corbyn. I think he's a really interesting example. It was really kind of interesting for me to follow his rise from someone who is kind of an outlier in his own party to eventually leading the party, despite being kind of having a very different view of politics and a different view of foreign policy. And it was, I think, really fascinating for me and instructive to see the way that the sort of party establishment, even if he was the leader of the party, kind of unite against him and kind of tried to undermine him at every turn. So it shows how difficult it must be to, even when you rise to the leadership of some of these parties in a Western liberal democracy, to actually meaningfully steer it in a different direction. And you obviously got a little bit of a taste of that as well. You mentioned prior to October 7th and like some of the difficulties you were having. And then in the days following October 7th, you put out a statement that I think for me, and I think a lot of people around this country that pay attention to Israel-Palestine, saw as kind of a breath of fresh air, where it was a statement that, in my view, was grounded in like empathy. And it was also took time to establish a kind of historical context. And it was a statement that didn't just mindlessly repeat the normal talking points we normally hear in these kind of moments about Israel's right to defend itself, which across the political spectrum we hear time and time again over and over, no matter what Israel's actually doing. So I thought that was a really incredible thing. I think a lot of people around the country did, and the political establishment that you're a part of, even inside the NDP, didn't really view it in that way, I guess, would be a nice way of putting it. Do you just want to talk a little bit about what happened during that period, those few days, and how you came out with that statement and your experiences afterwards?
Yeah, for sure. Before I even get into that, I think it's important to say, like, even during my campaign, a lot of the right-wing media came after me relentlessly. Like, there were articles written day after day after day because of my support of solidarity for Palestinian human rights on my campus. Like, I supported the BDS movement on my campus getting passed. So during the campaign, even, that was a huge topic, my support for Palestine. And before I even put my name in the ring, like, these are issues that I've taken a stance on before, and everyone was aware of my stance across the political spectrum. So it wasn't a surprise. I think that's important to note. It's not like I randomly decided to weigh in. Like,
Yeah.
I've been following this issue for some time, and everyone around me knew my stances on this issue. So when October 7th happened, I stayed quiet for 3 days. The leader of my party and many political voices across Canada weighed in, either like in condemnation of Hamas or saying that Israel had the right to defend itself. By day 3, the Rafah border closed. White phosphorus was being used, which is a chemical banned by the United Nations. And food and water were being stopped at the border. So from that, you could already tell the genocidal intent that the state of Israel had, because of the pace that these things were happening. And I was very alarmed at the speed at which everyone who had some sort of political power was talking about Israel's right to defend itself, but nobody was trying to contextualize, other than Palestinians themselves. No one in the political class had been talking about the right for Palestinians to exist and be safe and what was about to happen. And so by day 3, I was like contacting NDP staff. I was like, hey, like, this is not going to end up. This is going to be terrible. I'm getting emails from people in my riding who have family under the rubble right now. I actually took the time to read a very lengthy email to one of the staff, and I was like, I have to say something. These are stances I've taken before. Like, I don't know if I can be here in this space if I'm not going to be able to say something, because it's important. And not only are people expecting it, like, I expect it. What right do I have to be in these spaces if I'm not going to use them to say something meaningful? The only power that I have is like an elected official is when I choose to weigh in using my voice on different issues. So we had a bit of a back and forth. Uh, Common messaging that I would hear often in general from the NDP is like, we have to think about 2026. We have to think about the end project, the end goal. The key messages should be around the Greenbelt scandal and Ford. And these are the things that people care about. Anything outside of that calculation politically is seen as taking away from a main message that appeals to the main voters. And so it came it became very apparent to me that it would be a situation of like, either say nothing and wait for the right amount of people to die before I say something, or just, do the right thing. And I didn't anticipate getting the censure debate, which was 8 hours long, likening me to terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. I didn't anticipate getting kicked out of my caucus, which happened right before the censure vote. I didn't anticipate my right to speak in my role as an MPP being taken away. I didn't anticipate any of it, but what I was calculating at that time was my I think the mistake that progressives who are elected tend to often make is the idea that political calculus is more important than morality in these moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake because people can see through the performative bullshit that we put out in these rules. Like, the planet is burning, people are dying, and truthfully, like, I had already there was already an incident prior to this one where I had to unretweet a thing I retweeted about a Palestinian prisoner who died after being detained for 10 years. I retweeted a Palestinian scholar, Nora, who was talking about the detained prisoner who died, and I had to unretweet it. And then I was condemned in my local paper for a retweet. Like, by that point, I was already tired of being made to play some sort of weird political calculus about people's
Sure.
lives. So that was like my last straw. And I just think it's a mistake that we have to pretend to adhere to these invisible rules that don't exist. We can do things differently, and we should be able to value the voices of people who would feel politically at home in a party system that was representing them in a holistic way, that wasn't just about tight message boxes, that wasn't just about like random polls that tell you how many votes you're going to get if you take a stand on a certain issue or not. Like, we need to be able to calculate morality and into this. And like, I'll also say, Sven Robinson in like early 2000s, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the NDP federally, and he literally went to Palestine and squared up with an IDF soldier. Like, literally squared up with one.
Yeah. Like,
all
there
over
used
the
to be
media.
space to take this kind of position.
Yeah, it was there. It was on international news, and he didn't lose his critic portfolio. He was just made to be the foreign affairs critic for the NDP federally, except for the Middle East. But me saying something, I was framed as like making people unsafe. I was framed as being difficult to work with. I was like, all of these tropes that came out of nowhere in general, not just from the NDP, but from everywhere. All the while receiving more death threats than I've ever received in my entire life, and rape threats and a whole bunch of other things. And I had to actually go into hiding. So I think some of the way I was treated was to be made an example of, especially in the censure process. And I guess I'm just here to say, I think more people should still try to run as independent or not, whatever you want to do. But like, I'm here still in my MPP seat because I refuse to be pushed out. I refuse to be made to feel that my riding, Hamilton Centre, which is the poorest riding in all of Ontario, let me say, like, legitimately, like, I refuse to say that my riding and people in my riding don't deserve a voice, and that my riding doesn't care about Palestine, because that's not true. People do care, and we deserve to exist in these spaces um, as folks who have good politics, right? And so, yeah, I refuse to be pushed out. Sorry for ranting, but that's mostly what I
That's
have to
okay.
say.
And there's been a lot going on. No, I think I said something to the same effect around that time, which is that like it's one thing to say you stand with Palestinians when it's easy to do, when it's just kind of this like perfect victimhood that you can kind of talk about. It's a lot more difficult in moments like that, and I think that's the time when you have to do it the most, is when it's difficult. And that was a really difficult time to make that statement, and I think it was really an incredible thing that you did do that.
And
And
it's completely friggin' it's I feel so terrible because it's also at the same time political performative BS. Like the media just spent so much energy and time talking to me instead of Palestinians. And yeah, I did what I could to center what was going on. But even today, in today's day and age, like the same thing is still happening. Folks are being killed in Rafah right now after being told to head there for safety. And there's nothing we can do. Like I say all that to say, like, as much as I'm being applauded by folks on the left for doing what I did, what I said was also the bare minimum.
yeah,
The bare minimum, the safest thing I felt like I could say. We actually, like, my team and I put that up and we were like, oh, nobody's going to get mad because we quoted the United Nations. Like, and obviously I was wrong.
well, the United Nations is Hamas now, actually. So
Oh
unfortunately,
no.
yeah.
But like, yeah, so I say all that to say, like, I also feel hopeless, just like everybody else probably watching this and unsure of what to do. And uh, the important thing is to, yeah, cool, I put up a statement, but the important thing is to keep talking about it, keep going to the protests, keep emailing your MPs, do everything and anything that you can to pressure the federal government to do more than they're doing now and to stop selling arms to Israel. I think that's what we can do and disrupt where you can. The yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's just frustrating because we have a lot of conversation in this country. If you're on the left, you got the NDP is basically just the de facto representation for all these kind of movements for social justice or climate justice or Palestine. It's like it's the only vehicle on a federal level that can really speak to these issues. So it's been a consistent source of frustration, I think, when there's this reticence on the part of the NDP to really go all the way and sort of talking about these things. I know there's been some improvement, I think, over the Palestine issue in particular. I know there's been a lot of like convention fights over resolutions to try and talk about this more and advocate for a bit more of a serious position. And I know that's positive. But it's frustrating, I think, and I imagine it's really frustrating for you that, like, especially when you're under that level of scrutiny from the conservatives and the liberals and the media establishment attacking you like that your party just wouldn't take your side in that moment, even though now most people in the party have come along to this position that, oh yeah, we need to advocate for a ceasefire, and they're saying a lot of the similar things that you said immediately. But you know, now it's like you said, now it's kind of safe now that we can see the level of violence and horror that we all knew was coming. And meanwhile, you find yourself censored and not part of the caucus. Like, it just seems kind of a really backwards way of approaching this kind of issue and talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's, again, it goes back to this weird political calculus that I don't know how, obviously I wasn't in on the math. I don't know how people are deciding what they decide, but yeah, I think it just is, right? And I think in terms of the censure, I'm still fighting that, so hopefully that'll get repealed. I've left the door open for conversations really with anyone who's willing to collaborate on the motions I'm putting forward. I think the censure was created so that I I think the hope from the conservatives was that people like me would just disappear or learn our lesson
Yeah.
that we don't belong here. But that's not happening. I'm still going to work with community to table community drafted motions, and anyone who's willing to move them can move them. I hope that the NDP will change. I think the direction of the federal party has been nice to see. And I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm an independent. I'm gonna continue to do what I'm doing. And like I hope people come around to
Yeah.
before 2026, like especially changing how they operate internally and externally. I think there's a lot at stake. Like I as much as the NDP frustrates me, I'm tenfold more frustrated at the Ford government in terms of what he's doing to our healthcare system and our education system. He's literally privatizing it. Like people are going to die if they haven't already because they cannot afford to see a doctor. And we're living in a scary time, and I worry about what it means for him to serve another 4 years as premier, and the amount of people that will die because of his harmful legislation. Uh, so I hold that too. Again, the whole system is broken, and I'm unsure of where best folks should put energy. I think it would be encouraging to see lots of folks run as independent. I think it would be encouraging to see the NDP, especially provincially, change course and create dynamics that would allow for new voices, fresh voices, younger voices to actually belong in caucus, instead of adhering to these century old cultural rules of how politics should operate. Like, how do we adjust things so that we can operate differently? So yeah, I think both options are what I would like to see. Either more folks running as an independent, or the NDP actually changing course internally to restructure to allow for progressive, strong voices to exist without being pushed out. And on top of all that, fighting the censure, because I think that will set a precedent. It sets a bad precedent that the majority government can just decide to use a censure process. Censures are usually there to police the behavior of MPPs who are like their conduct in the House. I put up an Instagram statement and a Twitter statement. That had nothing to do with my behavior at Queen's Park. So for a majority government to just decide, because every other party voted against the censure, it was the Conservatives voting on their own thing that decided to take away the voice of somebody who was elected. That's borderline fascism coming from folks who tout free speech rhetoric all of the time, right? So
Yes.
that is in and of itself is a dangerous snowballing effect. And
Yeah,
so
sometimes I'm not so sure these people care about free speech the way that they claim to.
they
Can you
really
talk a little
don't.
bit about like the censor and how that's affected your ability to do your job, like specifically?
I mean, I can't do as much of the performative stuff. I can still vote on key issues that impact my writing. I can still speak in committee, which is where committee work is where the bulk of the work actually happens. You go through bills line by line. Um, and I can still vote in committee. I can still table motions. I just can't debate them. But most of the time, because we're in a majority conservative government, the conservatives just vote down anything to do with like anything that's not coming from themselves. And so when we're debating motions that we move, traditionally you're debating against empty chairs because they're not sitting at their desks anyway. So it's just performative. It's just for the camera clips. And then you can post online and say, I did this thing, I debated this thing that's going to get voted down. So I can't do that performative part of the job, but I can work with others to get them to move motions that I think are important to my writing if I want to. I can still table motions and put forward good ideas. So we saw that earlier in the week when I proposed social assistance reform ideas in collaboration with the ODSP Action Coalition in my community. I can do that kind of stuff, and I can still do a bulk of the job. In terms of locally in Hamilton Center, most MPPs, when they're at Queen's Park, kind of like negate their local community in their riding. So far, since we've opened our office, we've served 4,000 constituents, and we have a really active, newly formed independent riding association, which is not common in Canada. I don't think there's many independent riding associations that are active, but we have 60 members already. and we quietly raised about $35,000 without really much of a fundraising ask. So I'm still going out on the doors, canvassing and door knocking with my riding association, which also isn't common in between elections. And instead of asking for people's votes, I'm saying, hey, I've been elected for almost a year now. What are your thoughts? What are your key issues? And updating people on the work that I'm doing, rather than just only sitting at my desk in a performative way. So I
Yeah.
still think I can do a bulk of the job, and the pieces that the center impacts is just the debate piece, which is mostly useless, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah, well, still, it would be good to eventually get that removed, obviously. And I know there's going to be
Yeah.
a lot of people around the country that are going to be really interested to see how being an independent, works in practice. Like I said, it's like if you're on the left, you end up talking a lot about the NDP and criticizing the NDP because you know that the conservatives are not on your side and they're worse, and you know the liberals are not on your side in a lot of these issues. But it's hard not to look at, from my perspective anyways. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. From my perspective, though, it's hard not to look at the last 6, 7, 8 years and all the issues that are causing so much concern for so many people. There was the Trump era in the United States and the kind of growing threat of sort of right-wing extremism. There's the climate crisis, our housing situation in this country, COVID. And it just feels like it's been a huge missed opportunity for people in the NDP to really present a more unapologetic vision for how they could offer up something different than what our mainstream establishment is really doing. And we haven't, or Indigenous rights, again, is another example of this, is something that we should be taking more forceful issues on and stances on. And it just seems like there's been a failure to do that. And I think the fact that the needle hasn't really moved for the NDP federally anyway over the last during that time frame, I think it's hard not to look at that with a lot of disappointment, because there's a lot of issues that people are really passionate about that aren't really being meaningfully addressed by our ruling class, and there's not enough of an alternative being proposed. I did want to. So you mentioned something about the way that you became the focus of this sort of media cycle. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I noticed this often when it comes to like these sort of issues, but especially over the last 4 months, I've noticed this huge discrepancy between what our media is talking about and these little cycles of sort of faux outrage that take place. What our media is talking about, what our political figures are talking about, versus the horrific violence that we're seeing unfolding every single day.
Are you talking about the Spider-Man thing?
I'm going to mention that. Yeah, I'm talking. There's your statement. There has been the protests at Indigo. There was the protest outside of Selena Robinson's office in BC. There was protests at Melanie Jolie's residence a few weeks ago, and yeah, there was this protest a week or two ago that passed by Mount Sinai Hospital and saw someone dressed as Spider-Man go on top of the awning and wave a flag. And these incidents, all these separate incidents, caused this big outcry, and our media talks about it, and our political class weighs in on it, and everyone's kind of hand-wringing and denouncing these things while we're seeing just unimaginable violence unfolding every single day. I don't know about you, but just my phone has just been a constant stream of the most horrific things that I can imagine over the last 4 months. And our government is just fully supporting this, fully subsidizing it. And it makes me feel crazy after a certain point to look at what our media is talking about and these things that we're claiming to be outraged about versus what we're ultimately supporting in Israel-Palestine right now. So I guess this is an issue for me, though. Again, to bring it back to a critique of the NDP, I've seen a couple times now that prominent members of the NDP in these moments, I think, for whatever reason that I don't understand, kind of legitimize what I view as being really bad faith discourse and bad faith kind of outrage. And they throw gasoline on these things and say, "Oh, that's unacceptable. Like, obviously we need to protest, but we can't be doing that. We have to apologize for that. We've got to talk about this terrible incident with Spider-Man at Mount Sinai Hospital." And it's just very frustrating to see this over and over again.
Yeah,
do you think there needs to be room in the NDP or like in our country, in our discourse, not just to talk frankly and honestly about Palestine or any of these other issues, but to call out this kind of bad faith discourse and outrage and push back against these kind of these news cycles where we start talking about this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from kind of that like made up culture that I was talking about earlier. I think a lot of the politicians who weigh in and pro clutch are like, oh no, like they're protesting someone's office or someone's house. Like as someone who's like allegedly dropped a coffin in front of the mayor's house one time, and I was really upset with a few friends. Like sometimes the only avenue we have as activists is to take up the streets or to like show up and say, we're really upset that you've removed yourself from this conversation and you're hiding in your house, or you're just, I think the pearl clutching comes from this innate sense of like self-preservation that a lot of politicians have, to be like, oh no, I inherently am unsafe, which is fair. Like some people have gotten like real threats or been in real dangerous situations by people who don't have their head on straight. But for the most part, like this innate pearl clutching to like protect themselves is framed at odds from like people feeling unsafe, because literally entire police forces across Canada have said, we're going to protect the public from Palestinian protesters. Like it's the Palestinian organizers who are unsafe, right? Every time they take the streets or participate in an action. So I think it comes from not understanding how organizing works and like who actually is at risk when these things happen, or when these actions are planned. And it comes from trying to also distract from the main issue of what's actually going on. If like people in power can frame themselves as like the victim or being unsafe, it takes attention away from the people who are being literally massacred and killed and starved to death in Palestine. So I definitely think it's intentional, but it also is like coming from an innate weird place of white fragility often, and the need to center your own safety when it's usually not really at risk. I do think it's okay to protest in the ways that you can. Most of the time, organizers that protest, like if the problem is most politicians who are being protested are not okay with having public conversations. Like if you came out of your office and you had a conversation, or you came out of your house to have a real conversation about the issue and you showed that you were listening to folks on the ground, I'm sure that would be fine. Like people are just wanting answers, and because you've been absent, people have chosen to pull up to where you are. Like I'm rambling, but yeah, I think a lot of this pearl clutching comes from this weird culture of like, oh no, we're gonna center ourselves because we're elected. It really is not that deep. And the Spider-Man thing was ridiculous as well, and that was a pure distraction.
Yeah, and once again, you were roped into that as well. You saw conservative media trying. Oh, and of course, Sarah JAMA was present at this dangerous protest and framing it like that. Like it's really outrageous the way our media has kind of conducted themselves throughout the last 3 months, and I imagine it's been frustrating to be a part of that.
I definitely agree. I think I was definitely used as a tool to distract the public in some sort of way by right-wing media, and I was upset about it too. I still think it was important to say something, so I'm glad I did. But it definitely was blown out of proportion. You had like media randomly saying that me going to a protest was celebratory. Strange. And then Justin Trudeau weighed in about Mount Sinai Hospital without weighing in on the attacks on hospitals in Gaza. Very strange times that we're living in.
Yeah, no, it's been incredibly bizarre actually, to try and pay attention to it. So after all this time, and just the one thing I wanted to say as well, when you are involved in these protests and people say it's like celebratory or whatever, I would just like to point as well, and this goes out with your statement, is that anyone that knows anything about Israel and Palestine knew full well what was going to be happening after October 7th. And like you pointed out, by October 10th, if it wasn't clear on October 8th, it was certainly clear then exactly where this was going. And that's exactly why there were protests on almost day one, because people knew full well exactly what was going to happen. And all the folks that were making these kinds of statements and attending these protests because they knew the violence that was about to be unleashed in Gaza have been proven 100% correct. And all the people that were pearl clutching about it are maybe now coming around to this idea that, oh, maybe there should be some kind of ceasefire months later after tens of thousands of people have been killed, tens of thousands of children. So I think that's important to point out as well. And like on that subject, like, do you think Canada, because now you have Justin Trudeau, they just put out this statement with Australia and New Zealand and are kind of coming around to this idea of actually using the ceasefire language. We've seen Trudeau a number of times kind of stumble over this. Do you think that's too little too late? Like, is that something that you welcome?
It's too fucking late for a ceasefire. Like, these people have their heads fully into their asses to think now that that's a useful thing to be saying, when he had the opportunity to do something meaningful before 30,000 people were killed, and now there's no end in sight. Uh, I, sorry, I'm really mad because what is the point in this?
Yeah,
Like,
everyone.
again,
we
it
all
just
are.
feels like political theater. He hasn't fully committed to stopping the sale of arms, unless I'm mistaken, to Israel. So how much money is he funneled into killing Palestinians?
Well, I'm going to tell you,
How
actually,
much of our
I have that
tax
information
dollars?
right in front of me.
Okay, great.
Because that's one thing that I found really also extremely frustrating about the last couple of months is you see like liberal administrations like the Trudeau government and like the Joe Biden administration as well fully support Israel's criminality and violence over the last 4 months, but also doing so while taking this kind of tone of, oh, we're so concerned about this, and talking about humanitarian aid and trying to talk like they care about the violence that's being unleashed while also fully supporting this violence. Like, we can talk all like with the billions of dollars that America sends Israel, but the Trudeau government, according to this piece by Alex Kosh in The Maple, authorized since October $28.5 million of new military exports to Israel. So you have Trudeau, you have Melanie Joly or Chrystia Freeland or whatever trying to talk with some kind of empathy or talking about how concerned they are about whatever horrific incident that we've seen that day. And meanwhile, they've been funding this thing from the beginning and have been fully supporting it.
They're only saying anything now because of all the political pressure. I do not think they care. Or if they did care about the loss of human life, they would have waited earlier. They are only speaking now because of the political pressure that the Palestinian youth movement and other folks on the ground have been relentlessly putting into this work for months, if not years, but months since October 7th. They do not care. They have blood on their hands. If they're not held accountable in this life, I hope that they're held accountable in the next one. I blame Egypt too. There's a lot of anger to be had over what's going on, and I really hope the most we could do is just commit to not forgetting the role that Canada played in these atrocities now and later, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, and this is something that I wanted to get to as well, which is that, like, does it feel for you? I mean, it certainly feels like this way for me. But does it feel for you that like something has been lost with Canada's image, whether domestically or internationally, about the whole idea of like Western values? Canada loves to lecture other countries around the world about human rights and how much we care about protecting people and stopping violence and women's rights and LGBTQIA plus rights and all these things, or freedom of the press. And meanwhile, everyone around the world can see what we're supporting right now, the brutal violence against civilians, women and children, Israel openly assassinating journalists, doctors, occupying hospitals, just the most horrendous things we can possibly imagine. Do you think Canada in particular is going to be able to ever kind of restore whatever semblance of an image that we might have had on some international stage as being somewhat progressive or supportive of these ideals? Do you think that's gone forever now? Because it feels like to me, for a lot of people in this country and around the world, it's been fully exposed. This whole idea of either Canadian values or Western values is being exposed as just a total farce, a total lie.
The myth of Canadian exceptionalism is long, long gone. And it has been for some time. For those of us who are aware of colonialism here and the impact that the state of Canada has had on Indigenous people here, like that's not removed from our failure to stand as a country against what is going on to the treatment of Palestinian people and the genocide in the state of Palestine. So for me, it's been dead for some time, but I think in general, I can't see anything that Canada can do to rehabilitate its image. And it comes back to that question of we need to start electing politicians that don't just play a game of political calculus, because everyday people are seeing it. The voter turnout keeps declining. Like people are losing faith in this political system as it is already. And we need to start electing folks who actually give a shit about morals. Otherwise, what is the point? And I think there's nothing that Justin Trudeau can do to rehabilitate his image in my eyes or the eyes of the public. And again, I hope he's held accountable for his decisions in this life and the next.
Yeah, and just just to close this off, I don't want to be too much of a doomsayer about this, but it really does look like we're on the verge of what could be like a real conservative sort of reactionary wave in the next federal election that's been building, kind of bubbling under the surface for some time. I don't really understand why some of these Canadian reactionaries seem to have coalesced around Pierre Poilievre of all people, but hey, that's not really my place to question that, I guess. But I guess that's the thing is if that does happen, I'm hoping that it does not, but if we do get overcome with this kind of conservative populist wave, there's going to be a lot of people, progressive minded people around this country that are going to be looking around, wondering what happened and looking for someone that can actually give some answers or some real solutions to get out, to pull us away from the direction that we're going in. And I feel like that's not really going to happen as long as we have our only sort of nominally left-wing party is kind of hampered by this inability to say what needs to be said, and to really call these things out and take unapologetic radical stances about some of these real crises that we're facing. So that's why I'm thankful for the work that you're doing. I hope more people around the country are starting to pay attention to this and are tired of people playing these kind of games in these moments, whether it comes to foreign policy or domestic policy, housing or Indigenous justice or law and order or racism, whatever it is. I know there's people around the country that are tired of it, and I'm hoping that more folks around the country start to get the message that there will be people out there that will support you if you take these stances, if you don't play by these kind of phony rules. So that's why I'm thankful for you, Sarah, for the work that you're doing. Thank you for coming on the show to talk about your side of the story of everything that's been going on for the last few months. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone on Twitch also.
Yeah, they've been all very normal and respectful, all the weirdos on there. Do you just want to let folks know where they can contact you or find more information about what you're up to?
Sure. So you can go to my website, www.sarahjama.ca. Also, you can shoot me an email. We're pretty responsive. The email address is on my website as well. Reach out anytime. If you are ever in my neck of the woods, want to come out for a canvas, or even donate to support our riding association if you live in Ontario, we can use the support. We're going to be, our resources would be good. So if you have the time and the energy and the willingness to put in some effort out here, come reach out to us.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you again, Sarah. It's great to talk to you.
We'll Bye. Do I just leave the Zoom?
Yeah, I'll end it now. Okay. Bye. Okay. Look at that. What a normal and respectful audience you are. Wow, chat. We can be normal. Sometimes. Yeah. That was really great. It was really great to talk to Sarah JAMA. I've been really looking forward to this for a couple months now. So, with all the ways that she's been at the epicenter of these big media and political firestorms, I don't know that she's gotten really an opportunity to tell her side of that story and to talk about this stuff. So I was really happy that she was able to do that right here on TRRS. Your favorite show. That was very good stuff. And King Nuendo, thank you for the 40 months. I think King Nuendo is the first to 40 months. Thanks for the 40 months of Tier 1, King Nuendo, and all the...
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Time to get weird again.
Thank you, David, for 6 months. Like, now we can be a little weird. Yeah. We can go back to being a little... Let's have a kind of a slow drip of weirdness going back. Thank you, David. Honestly, it's so nakedly racist that they chose her to be the boogeyman for all things Palestine. It honestly is. Like, it's absolutely... It's almost like a parody. It's so farcical with the level of violence and criminality that's going on, and the way that our political class and our media class holds up Sarah as being like, oh, look at this disruptive person who won't do as she's told, and she's difficult. Like all these extremely racist kind of language, the way that, like, it's just gross. It's just grotesque. And honestly, like, I was being nice. I know there's a lot of scrutiny on Sarah. She's got to work with people. I'm trying to respect that. I don't want to be too scorched earth about it. But honestly, though, it was an absolute fucking disgrace that the NDP just didn't stand by her. Like, what is the NDP for? If it's not going to stand by their MPP when she's being attacked by the conservative establishment, by the media, for making what should have been an uncontroversial statement. We looked at it on the show. It was not a controversial statement. It really was not. It should not be controversial to talk about, to talk frankly and unapologetically about the way Israel's been conducting itself, to talk about settler colonialism, to talk about the way that Palestinians have been treated over the last several generations, even in those moments when no one wants to hear about it. Guess what? We don't care if you want to hear about it. I don't care. We're going to, and as I was saying, it's even more important in those moments to say these things. Who cares if it makes you uncomfortable? Grow up. It's time to grow up. The fact that the NDP didn't stand by Sarah JAMA, I think Sarah JAMA is pathetic, honestly. And if anyone from the NDP is watching this because I just talked to Sarah, come on. It's time to grow up. You can't stand by your own MPP when she makes a totally non-controversial statement prior to Israel killing tens of thousands of little kids, and you can't stand by her and try and protect her and shield her from that kind of criticism. Like, give me a break. Give me a break, please. Yeah, it's always been a weak spot for the NDP, Red Star. But at the same time, look, there's been improvement. But every time I think that there's been improvement, then something happens where they give into these phony outrage campaigns. Whether, like I was saying, whether it's about Sarah, whether it's about Melanie Jolie's office, whether it's about the Spider-Man thing. Like, just stop. Just stop. It's stupid. Oh, I'm glad that Mike's looking at that. That TikTok really went viral. Like I did about immigration. That really, I knew eventually if I kept putting out TikToks, at some point the TikTok algorithm would reward me, and it really did on that one. But I'm glad that Mike's looking at it. Yeah. Yeah, the peasant mentality thing. The peasant mentality really spoke to people, I think. Oh no, don't criticize my boss. Don't criticize my landlord. Don't criticize the people that own all the wealth in our society. No, I'm going to be nice to them. I'm going to be mean to the people that have nothing. Like, that's pathetic. Peasant mentality. That's what I was saying. This is why it's such a distraction. We get focused on improving the NDP's position instead of building actual power. And honestly, St. Lotus, as someone that's been paying attention to this stuff for a few years, I am inclined to agree. Like I said, I didn't want to put Sarah too much on the spot or make her go full scorched earth or anything. I would like to have a new party. I would like to see a new party in this country. It can't be that hard. And I know to have a new party, you need to raise a lot of money. And there's big obstacles to making a new party. That much is true. But like, I don't think that's a reason not to do it. I think there's people out there that would respond to that. If there was a new party that was speaking truth to power, speaking unapologetically and truthfully about Palestine or other issues that involves foreign policy, imperialism, about the climate crisis, about nationalizing major industries, about the housing crisis, about indigenous justice, land back. I am positive that there's a space in this country for a major party to start taking actual stances on this and to stop playing these games when it comes to these massive crises. I really do feel like, I know it does take a lot of money to have a new party. I really do feel like there would be people around this country, if there was a new party that started speaking openly and honestly and frankly and unapologetically about these things, would say, thank goodness, thank fucking God, finally someone is saying these things. And maybe we're in the minority. Maybe Canada is just this deeply reactionary country and no one will go for it. Maybe that's true. But I don't think that's a reason not to try to do it, though. I don't think that's a reason not to do it. And Kev B1, I mean, you're getting to a point as well where it's like the idea that we can make these kinds of systemic changes within the Western liberal democracy. Like, I don't really agree with that either. But I do think having a political party working within that system and advocating for this stuff would be a key component of trying to establish an actually new sort of social and political order. You know, it doesn't mean I think a new party could win enough seats in parliament to like nationalize the telecom industry or the tar sands or whatever it is. I don't really believe that. But I do think it would still be really valuable to have a party out there publicly making these kinds of statements and supporting these movements on the ground and not backing down to the establishment every time and say, oh, we're so sorry. Oh, did that protest upset you? Oh, we're so sorry. No, please stop. Like, actually backing up these social movements on the ground with whatever political power that they could build. I think that would be really important.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Left flank vets, hello. Thanks for the raid, Marcus. Thank you. What's up, folks? You just missed a really great interview with an actual political figure in this country, but that's okay. Thanks for joining the stream. It's me, Rob. It's nice to see you. Please bring it in here. How was the Left Flank Vets stream today? Who did I miss? I just talked to Hamilton MPP here in Canada, Sarah JAMA, who after October 7th put out a statement about Palestine that caused a massive outcry in this country and got her censored from the provincial parliament and got her kicked out of her own caucus with her in her party. So I was able to talk with her about all that. And now people are being weird, so maybe it's better that these folks didn't show up. Tell me what you think about Trump, foreigner. I can't win. I talk about America, people yell at me. I talk about Canada, like, what is this? What is this? Talk about America. We're the center of the goddamn universe. Where's my gun? Where's my gun? I'm going to shoot the screen. I'm an American. That's how I show displeasure. I shoot the screen. Yeah, that's right. That's how I appeal to Americans in the chat. Roll Tide, brother.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Cold beer on a Friday night.
TRRS Rob Mode 2 TRRS Maduro.
Thank you, Matt, for the 30 months of Tier 1. I appreciate it. And if anyone else wants to support this program, folks, I'm doing serious political interviews today and serious journalism. Thank you, Lioness. Thank you. I appreciate that. You put out like campaign posters that just say like gun. It just says the word gun on the bottom. And it's just me in a cowboy hat. I bet that would work. You can count on me.
You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I bet you could run for like a local office in America with that platform and maybe not win.
You can
but
count on
get
me.
Some
You're
votes.
gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Not another bean stain. Thanks for the prime, and thanks to Time Abolition as well for 8 months of tier 1. Thank you to you both. And if anyone else does want to subscribe, please do. The only way, folks, that I am able to do this show each and every day is if people subscribe to the channel. You can in Bakersfield. I'm gonna move to Bakersfield to become like a state senator or something. Or however, that city council person. I don't know. Not a one-issue candidate, but a one-word candidate. Exactly. It's like Obama. Everyone would project what they believe onto it. So the only way that I'm able to do this show, folks, is if people subscribe. So if you can, please subscribe. 25 subs to get to the goal, and a mere 40 subs to go to sing a little song. Hope Gun. Only 40 subs away from having me sing a little song, folks. And wouldn't it be great for Sarah JAMA to be like, oh, I did an interview with that guy. This guy, he's now singing like a fucking Michael McDonald song or something. Good. No, this is a really good career move for me.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Gun cares about us. Gun will save us.
Thank you, Amazing Bird Show, for 32 months. Tier 1. Thank you for that. Gun. Huh. And we do have a hype train about to leave the station. One more sub or gifted sub is going to kick off this hype train. One more measly sub is going to kick off the hype train, folks. You got to sing a country song if you're moving to Bakersfield. What would I do? I would have to think about that. I don't know. Like this, when I do karaoke, I really have to do a song that I know. I would have to listen to it and learn it and then come back. I could do a Johnny Cash. I am kind of partial to the Garth Brooks song, Standing Outside the Fire. But I don't know it enough that I could do it. Gun wall. Your actual program is to make a wall out of guns like Iron Throne is made of swords. That sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah, I could do Shania Twain. I'm Gonna Getcha. That's a good song. Gunny a gun. Folks, only 1 minute left. In 1 minute, if one single measly little sub would get this hype train going. It's been a bit of a slow week over here, and that's fine. That's totally fine. Wouldn't it just be fantastic, though, if this week...
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
You're able to push past... Oh, my goodness.
Wow. Okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
Oh, my goodness.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, my goodness. Marina, thank you very much for 28 months. Tier 1. I appreciate you, Marina. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And thank you, Diego, for 10 gifted subs, bailing my ass out yet again. Bailing my ass out yet again. Diego, thank you so much for 10 gifted subs. One of the people that I just genuinely don't know if I'd be able to do the stream if it wasn't for our friend Comrade Social Distancing. Thank you,
You can count
Diego.
on me. You're going to have good old Rob
Thank you,
to
Anon,
talk you
as
through
well
all this.
for the gifted sub. Thank you, Riskinverse, for the gifted sub. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Now we're cooking with gas here. Did the train left on level 4? We got level 4 of this hype train going right now. Did you see that Olivia Chow took a picture with Angela Davis after approving an increase to the police budget? Come on. Come on. She is just Olivia Chow is just repeatedly fucked up over and over and over again. Like since her election, especially over the last couple of months. She was denouncing the whole... Is there a Palestine protest that's happened in Toronto that she hasn't denounced at this point? Has there been one protest that she was like, okay, I guess this one's all right? I feel like she's denounced every single fucking Palestine protest that has happened in Toronto. Olivia chose a failed experiment. The experiment has concluded. Okay, there's no more need. It's weird how no matter how progressive you are, if you get elected a mayor in a major city center, the cops get more money. Isn't that kind of strange? Even if you specifically campaign against that. It's not just Olivia Chow, but Valérie Plante here in Montreal as well. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Or around America, you've seen this. You can explicitly campaign as a critic of the police, and just it seems like time and time again, these police unions just end up getting more and more money regardless of who's running. It almost seems like they are an armed gang that's controlling all our major city centers in conjunction with the corrupt political figures and the real estate developers. It's basically just a cartel that runs all these cities of the real estate developers, and then the police are their armed wing. They're a group of hired muscle armed thugs, and they just monopolize every single city budget, no matter who's in charge. Doesn't it kind of seem like that a little bit? I didn't expect a socialist revolution or anything, but I definitely didn't expect Olivia Chow to immediately step on every rake placed in front of her as mayor. And I mean, like, this is what I'm talking about, Norm. Like, it's just this is like time and time again. The people that work within this party just fail every one of these tests. When you get elected mayor of Toronto, they wheel a giant button marked tax breaks for the rich in front of you, and your only job is to press it as many times as possible without smoking crack or screwing your intern. Last two guys whiffed. Let's see how this one fares. Yeah. Folks, 11 more subs to go. 11 more subs to go to get to the goal. And I know we can do this, okay? Remember, it's not just about me. This is a group effort. This is a collective effort. We can do this. It would be our victory if we could get to that sub goal today. As you know, folks, the only way that I'm able to do this show and have conversations with political figures and do serious journalism like this, the only way I'm able to do this is if people support the program. As you know, I must make the little number at the bottom of the screen go up each and every day. Okay? It's my blessing and my curse. I have to do it. So if you can, please subscribe. This is a premature ending to that hype train, but that's okay. We'll get there. The police publicly endorsed Vancouver's mayor, accompanied by fear-mongering in the press about crime, despite crime rates going down. Or look at the way that the NYP, like, it's not even, this is not a Canadian thing. This is like every city center, like in Canada and the United States. Look at the NYPD and the way that they treated Bill de Blasio. Like, Bill de Blasio's like a fucking weird fuck up, and had mild criticisms of the police, and they basically threatened his family. They basically threatened his family for the fact that he even criticized them, not defunding them, not like he didn't meaningfully do anything, just criticized them. And they acted like he was like, they like basically threatened his family. Turned their backs to him when he was entering rooms and stuff. It's insane. Yeah, it's totally out of the open. They're totally out of control, these people. Completely out of control. Are you saying cops are actually bad guys? Yeah. It's crazy that we've just like, I would never dream of saying that it's a bad thing that we devote like 60% of every single city budget to support this gang of testosterone-fueled, armed, violent thugs who don't even seem to have any relation to actual crime numbers, whether they get funding or not. And in fact, many times are contributing to the crime themselves and just assaulting and murdering people in the street with no trial. Yeah, I actually think that's bad that we do that. I think it would be good to spend some of that money on housing and parks and education and healthcare. Instead of giving it to the violent armed thugs militarily occupying our communities. How about that? That's one of those crazy opinions that you can't say or get in trouble. Oh no. That's one of those crazy things you can't say or you get in trouble. Or even the NDP is like, whoa, you can't say that. Hey, come on now. Like, what is with this country? Why can't we talk about this stuff? It's ridiculous. Like, I genuinely, maybe I'm overconfident. Maybe I have like some kind of fucking complex or something. But that's one thing, as long as I've done this kind of work, podcasting or streaming or being able to have a voice or a platform or whatever, I really do want to do what I can to change the rules of what we can talk about in this country, in our discourse and the kind of positions that we can hold. I want to go find those edges and outer boundaries of what we're allowed to talk about and push way through it. Because it's just so stifling. You see that with Sarah JAMA. You see it all over the country. Our inability to talk about these things. Yeah, Nick. I think that's a very good point as well. Would love to know the real story of the relationship between the RCMP and Gabriel Wortman. Like, what happened? Wasn't there supposed to be a public inquiry about that? What happened with that? Did that bring all the truth to light about that? Is that something we should talk about? Maybe the fact that the RCMP, not only are they a key component of committing genocide, ongoing genocide against indigenous people, but they're connected to the largest mass shooting in the history of this country, deeply, intricately connected to it. Maybe we can get some answers about what happened with that. Maybe we should talk about that. It was published in IRC, brought precisely zero insight into what happened. They investigated themselves and they found that they did nothing wrong. I mean, and this is a sickness. It's a sickness in our media establishment. It's a sickness in our political establishment. And like you can, on a domestic level and on an international level as well, this willingness on the part of our political figures and media figures to just act as stenographers for these fucking cops. And when the cops say something, anything, we take that in our political and media culture as just being inherently true. And we do the same thing when it comes to Israel. We do the same thing when it comes to the United States. When it comes to their foreign policy, we do the same thing. We just take their statements as being inherently true. And anyone that ever questions this is like ostracized. Even the fact, especially when it comes to Israel, that so many of their claims have been exposed over the last couple of months as being totally fraudulent. And we're in fact engaging in both political and moral malpractice when we take the things that they say and we just take it as being true rather than asking basic questions about it or trying to criticize it or critique it in any way. You know, why do we do this? It's absurd. Like when people continually lie to you over and over and over again to continue taking their statements at face value. Every media outlet and every politician has been pushing Zionist talking points consistently across the board. But if you just go out and talk to literally any normal Canadian who doesn't work in politics or media, we all see what's going on. The entire Gazan population is on the edge of a knife right now. They're surrounded by the IDF with weapons pointed at them, and food and aid is being blockaded by settlers. This is black and white, and the bullshit people like Olivia are doing is extremely transparent. Yeah. No, it's farcical. It's farcical that the NDP is still failing that moment in those situations. And I'll tell you, it's dangerous and in fact harms Jewish people when the only people that are making arguments against Israel are coming from these right-wing reactionaries who are actual anti-Semites. Who use these moments to offer up this criticism of Israel that no one else is really doing on a mainstream level. And it pulls people into this reactionary pipeline. Like when Sarah was talking about Israel as a settler colony and talking about settler colonialism in her statement, that's the reason, as I've said a number of times, that's the reason why Canada supports Israel. It's not because there's some big conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. When you look at the discrepancy between what our media talks about and what's happening there, our political figures and what's happening there, it's because they're a genocidal settler colony just like us. And they're part of the international rules-based order criminal cartel just like us. And we stand by one another regardless of what they're doing. It has nothing to do with any kind of conspiracy about controlling our government or anything like that. When you tell people that criticizing genocide is anti-Semitic over and over, they're not going to decide that genocide is good. They'll decide that anti-Semitism is fine then. Yeah, and it's also anti-Semitic to deny the role, looking at these protests and saying all these protests, they support Hamas, they do this, they do that, they're anti-Semitic, they make Jewish people feel unsafe. We need to make sure that everyone's censored and no one can say anything that's truthful because it makes people feel unsafe. But what about the Jews that are at these protests? There's been Jews at every single one of these protests. Can they feel safe? Are we worried about whether they feel unsafe when they're being their whole position is being totally fucking ignored? When genocide is being committed in their name and they're saying, we're not comfortable with this. We don't want this. And they're going to protest and they're being manhandled by cops. Are we concerned about their safety? Are we concerned about them having a safe space to talk about these things? Well, no. No, it turns out we're not actually interested. We're interested in making a few people feel safe. And when it comes to Palestinian activists, whether they're Jewish or any other culture or nationality or religion or whatever, we don't really care about them feeling unsafe at all. In fact, we want them to feel unsafe. So they shut up. So they just shut up and stop criticizing it while it's happening. Don't confuse conspiracy with the quiet collusion of class interests. And that's a great way of talking about it, Carnot. And like I said, I think when the institutional left fails at talking about these things, it does leave the door open for some really nasty people to start having these conversations. Anyway, that was really, it was nice to have that conversation with Sarah JAMA. I was really happy that she was able to do that. I'm glad I put on my serious journalist outfit today. Can I be totally honest with something? I've been planning this interview for a while, but because I have a bad brain, I hadn't put it in my calendar. And yeah, she was on TRRS an hour ago. Staggeringly handsome chatter. You just missed her. But I'll put up the highlight or whatever if you want to watch it. It was a really good conversation. I hadn't put it in my calendar, and I thought that it was on Friday for some reason, and I like sat down at my desk today and I am going to not forget to cut it for the podcast feed, Carnova. I won't do that. But I sat down at my computer. I had I had to edit the podcast. I was like, maybe I can drop in and for a little Helldivers action. And I got a DM from her like, oh, can we do it at 12? We were supposed to do it at 10 a.m. And she was like, can you do it at 12? And I was like, yeah, of course, no problem. And I totally forgot that today was the day that I was supposed to do that. That's why I didn't mention it yesterday, because I totally forgot. But it went okay, right? It was fine. Nick, Helldivers 2 is so fucking good. It's honestly one of the best games that I've ever played. It's so cool and fun. It scratches this very specific itch of the exact kind of sci-fi that I was into. It's so great. Nick, you can join my squad. You can be the wide-eyed rookie. I think the one and only Marina is getting Helldivers. Hell yeah. Marina, I would love for Marina to join the squad and start spreading some democracy around the galaxy. It's so great. So honestly, last night after I finished podcasting, I wanted to play it. I just couldn't play. I was in a queue for about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get on. And then by the time I was actually on, I was like, I'm too tired. I can't do this. It was 12:45. I was like, I have to go to bed. I've decided instead of a raw recruit, I'm role-playing as a science officer. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting angle. Dimitri and I played the bugs on hard mode, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in a video game, and we failed. I think we're at some point, maybe tonight, although I have less time in the evenings right now because I'm parenting, but I think we're going to have to do a hard mode automaton mission. If someone on Steam is on and in, let them invite you, you'll bypass the queue. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think we're going to have to do a hard automaton mission, though. I think I'm battle-hardened enough that we can at least try one. I played hard mode on bots. It got hairy pretty quickly. We got glorious victory. Nice. I think we got to try it. I think I'm ready to try it. Yeah, but Nick, absolutely get it. It's just absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I'm on PC. I play it on PC. And it is cross-play with PlayStation. That's rough, Baldwin. I've had an absolute blast playing that, and I've been thinking about it more than any other game that I've played for quite some time. Let's get to this video from Ben Norton. Okay?
The United States.
Ben Norton has a video about the UN, the U.S. killing the 4th UN call for peace in Gaza. So let's take a look at that.
States has voted against 4 different UN Security Council resolutions that called for peace in Gaza. The vast majority of countries on Earth have called for a ceasefire. However, the United States is standing in the way of the entire international community and preventing peace in Gaza. On February 20th, the United States used its veto power in the UN Security Council to block a resolution that was introduced by Algeria that called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The official United Nations news agency created a very useful graphic that shows...
So I wanted to ask too, someone mentioned that Mike from PA was watching my TikTok earlier. Did anyone clip that? I would like to be able to see that clip later. Maybe Mike could even grace us with a raid. That would be kind of nice. Or you can just take my content and look at it and not reciprocate. That would also be fine. Whatever. Who cares?
The 15 members of the UN Security Council, and you can see that 13 of the 15 members voted in support of this resolution. The UK abstained, and the US was the only country that voted against it. But because of the structure of the UN, 5 countries have permanent seats. Those are the victors of World War II, the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China. And that gives them veto power, which means the United States is able to prevent the resolution from being passed. And the UN Security Council is the only UN institution that actually has teeth, that actually has the ability to implement resolutions. So this all goes to show that the United Nations is fundamentally paralyzed because the structure was created in a way where the United States can control everything that happens, and the US can unilaterally prevent the entire world from implementing a resolution. And Washington has done this 4 times in the 4 months since October. Back on the 9th of December, the United States once again vetoed a resolution in the Security Council. This had been introduced by the United Arab Emirates, and it called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, and the vote was exactly the same. 13 countries in support, the UK abstained, and the US voted against. Then, back on the 18th of October, once again, the US vetoed a resolution. This resolution had been introduced by Brazil, and it called for humanitarian pauses to deliver life-saving aid to millions of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. In this case, it was 12 countries in favor, 2 countries abstained, the UK and Russia, and 1 country voted against it, the US. Now, why did Russia abstain in this resolution on the 18th of October that had been introduced by Brazil? Well, that was because 2 days before, on the 16th of October, Russia had introduced its own resolution that called for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. And in that case, this was the first resolution that was introduced in the Security Council involving the war on Gaza since the war began on the 7th of October. So this was just 9 days into the war. And in this first resolution introduced by Russia, 5 countries voted in support of the ceasefire: China, Gabon, Mozambique, Russia, and the UAE. And in this case, 4 countries voted against, which were the Western powers and also Japan. So the major colonial powers that colonized much of the world. That was the UK, the US, France, and Japan voted against it. And in this first resolution, 6 countries abstained: Albania, Brazil, Ecuador, Ghana, Malta, and Switzerland. But again, that was because Brazil introduced its own resolution 2 days later. And that was the resolution that almost all of the members supported. 12 of the 15 members voted in support of that, and the US vetoed it. Now, this latest US veto of the Algerian resolution on the 20th of February is especially scandalous because the US did this after the top legal authority on earth, the United Nations top judicial authority, the International Court of Justice, which is located at The Hague. Back in January, The Hague ruled that Israel had to stop killing Palestinians, and the International Court of Justice said that there is sufficient evidence to investigate Israel on charges of genocide. The ICJ was very clear in its ruling. It stated that Israel must abide by its obligations under the Genocide Convention, and it must stop killing Palestinians, and it must stop causing serious bodily or mental harm to Palestinians. Since this ruling, Israel has killed thousands of Palestinians and injured tens of thousands of Palestinians. So Israel is blatantly violating this ruling from The Hague, the top legal authority on earth. And meanwhile, the U.S. continues to send weapons to Israel to help it kill Palestinian civilians and violate the Genocide Convention and to violate the Hague's ruling. The United States government, the Joe Biden administration, is directly complicit in what the Hague said clearly can constitute potential charges of genocide. The United States is directly assisting Israel, and it is preventing the UN Security Council from actually holding a ceasefire and bringing about peace in Gaza. And the US is holding the entire world hostage, using its veto power at the Security Council expressly in order to prevent the implementation of a ruling by the International Court of Justice. Meanwhile, the United Nations has reported that roughly 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza have either been killed or wounded by Israel or are missing, are trapped under the rubble of the buildings that Israel has destroyed with U.S. weapons. On the 5th of February, the UN World Health Organization reported that 100,000 people in Gaza were, quote, either dead, injured, or missing and presumed dead. And furthermore, the World Health Organization estimated that 60% of the 27,000 Palestinians who had been killed were women and children. The vast majority are civilians. Furthermore, 66,000 Palestinians were injured and required medical care that remained very difficult to access because Israel has destroyed or damaged almost all of the hospitals and medical centers in Gaza. Those were the figures as of the 5th of February. Today I'm recording this analysis on the 21st of February, and the latest estimates are that more than 29,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza. And the health ministry's data has proven to be consistently accurate. In fact, as I explained in a separate video, which I will link to in the description below, Israeli intelligence agencies use the Gaza Health Ministry data, its casualty figures, for their own analysis, admitting that it's accurate. And furthermore, despite US President Biden's extremely misleading claims to the contrary, multiple medical experts have published peer-reviewed scientific articles in the leading medical journal, The Lancet, also looking at the data from the Palestinian Health Ministry and concluding that it is very accurate, and if anything, it actually understates the number of Palestinians who have been killed by Israel. In fact, the most mainstream of media outlets in the US, the Associated Press, AP, published a shocking article that is titled, "Israel's Military Campaign in Gaza Seen as Among the Most Destructive in Recent History." And I'm going to read a few quotes from this article, once again, from the most mainstream of US media outlets, the AP. Quote, "The Israeli military campaign in Gaza, experts say, now sits among the deadliest and most destructive in recent history. Israel's offensive has wreaked more destruction than the razing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012 and 2016 in 5 years. Israel has also destroyed more civilian infrastructure and killed more civilians than Russia's war in Ukraine's Mariupol, or
in 2 years.
even than the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. Israel has killed
Insane.
more civilians than the US-led coalition did in its 3-year campaign against ISIS in Iraq. And furthermore, this report in the AP notes that the vast majority of bombs dropped on the besieged Gaza Strip are US made. These weapons that Israel has used to massacre civilians include 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs that have killed hundreds of Palestinians in densely populated areas. The Wall Street Journal reported back in December that the U.S. has been sending Israel these 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs in order to destroy civilian areas in Gaza. And the Wall Street Journal reported that between October 7th and this December report on the 1st of December, the U.S. had sent Israel 15,000
Giving people
bombs
money so
and
they buy things from you. What a
57,000
scam.
artillery shells.
What an amazing
In fact,
scam.
the Biden
It's good
administration
work if you can
has
get it.
been repeatedly bypassing Congress using an extraordinary measure.
You have the
to
U.S. government just
send
giving them money
Israel
and then also
weapons
giving money to
as
other
it's
countries
carrying
to
out
give to
what
you.
even the International Court of Justice says can be investigated as genocide.
Incredible.
And while the Biden administration claims that they supposedly want peace and a ceasefire in Gaza, the Wall Street Journal reported on the 17th of February that the U.S. plans to continue sending more and more weapons to Israel. They reported that the Biden administration has planned another arms package, including roughly 1,000 Mk-82 bombs, 1,000 joint direct attack munitions, and another 1,000 bomb fuses worth tens of millions of dollars. And this happens while Israel is planning to launch an assault on the city of Rafah in the south of Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltered, are crammed into this small area after they have been ethnically cleansed from their homes. And the Biden administration claims that it supposedly wants peace and a ceasefire. And yet, not only is the Biden administration continuing to send more and more weapons to Israel, but furthermore, the U.S. has voted against 4 different resolutions in the UN Security Council calling for peace in Gaza. And in 3 of those resolutions, the U.S. was the only country that voted against the resolution out of the 15-member Security Council. The U.S. has vetoed unilaterally 3 of these resolutions. So the Biden administration does not actually want a ceasefire. It does not want peace in Gaza. And any media outlets claiming that the Biden administration can't do anything and its hands are tied and Israel is acting alone and Netanyahu can't be controlled, that is propaganda. It is simply not true. Those media outlets are printing propaganda for the U.S. government. The U.S. is sponsoring Israel and allowing
Canada.
it to continue to massacre Palestinian civilians, to kill tens of thousands of people, and to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. The U.S. is directly responsible for this war, and if it truly wanted the war to end, it could allow one of these UN Security Council resolutions to be passed, and the war would end immediately, because Israel cannot carry out this war without U.S. support. What's incredible is
Like, I'm not muted. No, okay, I'm not. Like, this is how much the U.S. wants to stop the war. Like we talked about last night or yesterday on the stream yesterday, you know, voting down this resolution and then using this kind of mealy mouth, oh, we support peace. This ceasefire resolution is like interfering in our peace process kind of thing. And then look at this statement from the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
We intend to do this the right way so that we can create the right conditions for a safer, more peaceful future. And we will continue to actively engage in the hard work of direct diplomacy on the ground until we reach a final solution.
Excuse me? That's how much they want peace. That's how much they support this peace process. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And we don't think, do you think these words, do you think this little statement is off the cuff? We don't think they know when they use this kind of language. She's reading prepared remarks. Oh, did she misspeak? I can't believe she accidentally used that word. Yeah, of course they calibrate this shit word for word. Yeah, it's the Fourth Reich, baby. You better believe in a Fourth Reich. You're living in one. The U.S. is arguing today that at the ICJ that Israel shouldn't end the occupation of Palestine right away. It says this page doesn't exist. Eric, you missed Sarah JAMA. Yes. Or Sarah JAMA. I always mispronounce her name. Jesus. You did miss her, but I will be putting the clip online.
A few days ago at the Munich Security Conference, Secretary Blinken emphasized that it is more urgent than ever to proceed to a Palestinian state, one that also ensures the security of Israel and makes the necessary commitments to do so. In light of these considerations, the court should not find that Israel is legally obligated to immediately and unconditionally withdraw from occupied territory. The court can address the questions before it within the established framework based on the Land for Peace principle and within the parameters of established principles of occupation law.
Yeah, great. That's how much they support the peace process. No ceasefire, more weapons. Don't withdraw from the illegal settlements. Those settlements are an act of war, by the way. You know, occupying a people, keeping them in a concentration camp, opening up, like creating these new settlements on land that's doesn't belong to you. Those are acts of war. But who's the nation that has the right to defend themselves and who doesn't? Yeah, getting a black woman to use the words final solution is crazy. I mean, it's grotesque, I think, the way that they so cynically use this kind of like diversity in an effort to whitewash their own imperialist violence, putting women and women of color and racial and sexual and gender minorities out in front of these like atrocious, disgusting policies. It's so sick. And then it gives people the idea that that's what identity politics is. Yeah, see also, do not come. That's right. I mean, the press secretary is a Haitian woman at a time when that she's also doing her job justifying this genocide and justifying Biden's immigration policies, which attack Haitian people and have been specifically, especially cruel to Haitian migrants. And you've got a Haitian woman out there being the front person for this administration, justifying intervention in Haiti. It's sick. It's sickening. And Canada, too. Isn't the foreign minister a Somali Canadian? Yeah, he's a Somalian refugee who then used his position to talk about how we're defunding UNRWA because Israel made some kind of outlandish claim about UNRWA employees being terrorists. That's how much this kind of like diversity works. And when someone is diverse and comes in and says things that they don't want to hear, like Sarah JAMA, they fucking freak out and lose their minds, don't they?
Is that now even the European Union, which strongly supports Israel, but even EU officials are speaking out. Like, for instance, the top EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, on the 13th of February, he admitted that Israel is carrying out a slaughter in Gaza. He used the term slaughter, and he also said that the U.S., they claim that they want peace, but the U.S. continues to give more weapons. So he says, stop saying please and actually do something. Here's this clip of the EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell.
I don't pretend to be in charge of the foreign policy of the US. I have enough of the foreign policy of the European Union. But let's be logical. How many times have you heard the most prominent leaders and foreign ministers around the world saying too many people are being killed? President Biden said this is too much on the top. It's not proportional. Well, if you believe that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide less arms in order to
cancel
prevent
this guy.
So many people being killed.
What is this pro-Hamas guy
logical?
saying? This is outrageous.
They're going to evacuate. Where? To the moon? Where are they going to evacuate these people? So if the international community believes that this is a slaughter, that too many people are being killed, maybe they have to think about the provision of arms. And by the way, today a court in Netherlands has ordered to the government to stop exporting the spare parts of the F-35 fighters to Israel in order to be sure that the International Court of Justice rule is being implemented. So I don't know, every member state is the owner of its foreign policy, but this is a little bit contradictory to continue saying that there are too many people being killed, please take care of people, please don't kill so many. Stop saying please and doing something.
We've seen the same hypocrisy from the Canadian government. The Trudeau government in Canada said that they're deeply concerned by reports of an Israeli military assault on Rafah. However, at the same time, the Canadian government has approved $28.5 million worth of new permits for military equipment exports to Israel directly during this war, while the ICJ says that there is sufficient evidence to investigate Israel for genocide. Canada has been arming Israel, and yet the Canadian government claims that they're so concerned about the Israeli military operation. This is the incredible hypocrisy. The US and Canada say, oh, we're so concerned about human rights of Palestinians, and we supposedly don't want Israel to attack Rafah, but we're giving Israel tens of millions of dollars of weapons in order to attack Rafah and massacre Palestinian civilians. And in the case of the US is vetoing any Security Council resolution that could actually bring about peace and prevent Israel from invading Rafah and ethnically cleansing Palestinians. So it shows that rhetoric doesn't mean anything. Western governments can say something, but it's action that matters, not words. And the words of the US and Canada and European governments, by the way, despite those comments by people like Joseph Borrell, their words are not being matched by their action. In terms of their tangible action, they are supporting Israel as it is massacring Palestinian civilians. Here is the report from the official UN news agency titled, US vetoes Algerian resolution demanding immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And you can see the photo of the US representative to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, clearly quite upset. You know, you can see her face, and obviously she can understand what's going on. This image is going to be remembered in history around the world. The symbol of the US voting against peace, holding the United Nations and the world hostage. I want to look at a few quotes from this UN news agency report. It looks at the statements that were made by different members of the Security Council. It quoted the Russian representative at the United Nations who said, quote, "Today we have witnessed another black page in the history of the Security Council." He said, "The United States is covering up on behalf of its closest Middle Eastern ally and playing for time so that Israel can complete its inhumane plans for Gaza, namely to squeeze the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and completely cleanse Gaza." Those were the words of the Russian ambassador. So Russia is formally accusing Israel of ethnically cleansing Palestinians out of Gaza. Now, the Israeli government itself has admitted this, by the way. Back in November, a top Israeli minister boasted that, quote, "We are rolling out Nakba 2023. He proudly referred to what Israel was doing as a new Nakba, referring to the mass ethnic cleansing of indigenous Palestinians.
If the concern is that Russia's the bad guys, it would help if we stopped making Russia look like the good guys. I mean, that's what I was saying yesterday, right? And Ben pointed this out earlier as well. You know, whether you like it or not. You don't have to like them. You don't have to like Putin. Look at the stances that they're taking on this. And look at the discrepancy between violence against civilians over the last 2 years in Gaza versus anything that Russia's been doing in Aleppo or in Ukraine or everywhere. And we're supporting the far, far worse, more violent government. So what does that say about us if your view is that Russia's bad for bombing Aleppo and for invading Ukraine? What does it say about us when we're supporting the people that are doing way, way worse than that? Well, it doesn't say anything good.
The creation of the state of Israel, that mass ethnic cleansing was called the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic. And Israeli officials have been boasting that they're carrying out a new Nakba, a new ethnic cleansing of indigenous Palestinians. Now, what was even more striking about this UN Security Council meeting is that even France's representative said very clearly, quote, "The human toll and humanitarian situation in Gaza are intolerable and Israeli operations must end." That was the French ambassador. So multiple European countries are saying that Israel needs to stop this war, this massacre in Gaza. It is the United States that is continuing to facilitate Israel's military operations, its massacre. Furthermore, the Chinese ambassador spoke out very forcibly. He said that the U.S., by vetoing this resolution calling for a ceasefire, is pushing Gaza further into crisis at a time when Palestinians are struggling on the brink of death. He said that the U.S. is sponsoring violence that is destabilizing the entire region, and the Security Council must act quickly to stop the carnage. And the Chinese representative called on the international community to give Palestinians a chance to live and to provide justice. But the U.S. is preventing that, and the U.S. vetoed the resolution. And this is the fourth time that Washington has voted against a similar resolution since October. Speaking of which, a doctor from the United States published an article in the Los Angeles Times this February titled, "I'm an American doctor who went to Gaza. What I saw was not war, it was annihilation." He wrote, "I have worked in other war zones, but what I witnessed during the next 10 days when he visited Gaza was not war, it was annihilation." This is a chilling article. I'm not going to read other parts of it because honestly, it sounds like a horror movie. I mean, it's blood-curdling, and you can read it for yourself, but, be...
And remember as well, like this is in the LA Times, remember the big piece in the New York Times that's all this kind of like atrocity porn, especially the stuff about sexual assault, that is based entirely in like secondhand stories from these like proven dishonest people, no actual evidence, versus like the shit that we have seen, that we have mountains of actual evidence, video evidence of it happening. And the way that the New York Times will do that to support Israel with stuff that there's zero evidence for. It's really insane.
I want to warn you, it is absolutely shocking the things that he described, how he had to perform surgeries without anesthesia, without medical equipment. He described how doctors in Gaza, and there are very few because many of them have been killed by Israel, but the few that who remain, doctors are being forced to use 19th century U.S. Civil War era equipment to perform amputations on children in Gaza and he noted that the vast majority of his patients in Gaza were Palestinians who were sleeping in their beds, and at night, Israel bombs their house, and many of their family members die. But for those who survive, they have to go to these makeshift hospitals that are just crammed full. I mean, it is absolutely horrifying. And it shows that, once again, this is not simply a war. The ICJ, the Hague, has said very clearly that Israel can be investigated for genocide. And by the way, I should also point out that January ruling by the Hague was on one investigation into Israel for genocide, but there's also another case going on right now at the International Court of Justice investigating Israel for its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories. So this is another case in The Hague against Israel that you should keep your eye on. And by the way, 20 years ago, back in 2004, the ICJ ruled on another case in which they found that Israel's building a separation wall, an apartheid wall in the occupied Palestinian territories violated international law. That ruling, which was on the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory, that's the name of the case, Israel was found guilty of violating international law in a vote of 14-1. And fun little historical fact, can you guess who the single judge out of the 15 was who voted against this case and in support of Israel's violation of international law? Drum roll, that was the U.S. judge. It was the judge at The Hague who is a U.S. citizen, of course. And speaking of which, the U.S. government is actually now threatening South Africa because South Africa introduced the case in the ICJ that charges Israel with genocide. The U.S. Congress is now reviewing a bill that would officially review relations with South Africa and impose what are essentially sanctions on South Africa, accusing this case of being supposedly politically motivated, despite the fact that The Hague ruled very clearly that there is sufficient evidence to investigate Israel for genocide. This shows, once again, that the United States is a rogue state that violates international law more than any other country on earth. And in fact, we saw a shocking example of
it is
the
a
US
blatant bullying tactic, Hollywood coat, but I think it's one kind of interesting thing about this, the new world, the shifting geopolitical landscape, the era of multipolarity, the era of multilateralism, whatever you want to call it, which is that I feel like it's because of that, you know, nations like South Africa have the ability to be able to make these kinds of statements and put themselves out there like that. Because now it's kind of a different ballgame. And if you go against the U.S. can't just target you with sanctions or try to screw you, because now there's alternate institutions being built, like BRICS, which South Africa is a part of, that all of a sudden make it a lot more easy to actively push back against what the U.S. or Israel or anywhere else is doing. And I think even 10, 15 years ago, that would be way more difficult to do. So that's one reason that I think it's really interesting and encouraging to see these new international institutions popping up, because it allows this kind of thing to happen.
Government's mentality toward this, and frankly, the genocidal attitude of U.S. government officials. This February, the governor of New York State was giving a speech at a pro-Israel event, and she defended Israel's massacre in Gaza by saying, quote, "If Canada someday ever attacked Buffalo," that is in New York State,
I didn't even think I talked about this. I think I forgot to talk about
there
this.
would be no Canada the next day. So she's saying that Israel has the right to destroy Gaza, to wipe off Gaza off of the map, because the U.S. would destroy Canada if Canada ever attacked the United States.
First of all, I've got to say, I'm not so sure this analogy makes sense. This analogy, I'm not so sure makes a whole lot of sense, because, first of all, America probably will eventually attack Canada when they need our fresh water. I'm sure that's going to happen in the future regardless. But also, if America, like you were talking about Buffalo, if Buffalo was like occupying Windsor, Ontario, or occupying Ontario for 70 years and turned Windsor, Ontario into like an open air concentration camp for the last 20 years and controlled everything that could go in or come out, routinely dropped bombs on Windsor, building settlements in Ontario territory, with a heavily armed military force, arresting people, arresting little kids, routinely dropping bombs on them, creating alternative like roads and an entire apartheid system that Canadians couldn't use. And that went on for 70 years. Well, Canada would be absolutely within its rights to then attack Buffalo. if we want to talk about that analogy, we would just let it happen. Of course, we would be like, yeah, please more. Please, can you have some more? But in this hypothetical scenario, Canada would be 100% justified in attacking Buffalo. And I think anyone would understand that. Anyone would understand that dynamic. From the Detroit to the Erie, Windsor will be free. You know? So, yeah, I don't think opposite of Buffalo is Fort Erie. I was just thinking of Windsor because it's close to the United States. But yeah, I mean, that's the analogy. It's not just like, oh, Canada's one day just decided. Canada one day just decided to attack Buffalo for no reason, no context. Nothing happened prior to that influenced that situation at any time. I mean, that's just absolutely absurd. If you want to do that analogy, it would have to be with that kind of context, which anyone would understand, again, that Canada would be absolutely... You just got jealous of our freedom. That's right. Canada would be absolutely 100% justified in attacking Buffalo in this case.
This is an incitement to genocide. This is a justification of genocide by a U.S. government official. And meanwhile, top United Nations officials, including the head of humanitarian relief for the United Nations, has warned of a slaughter in Gaza and said very clearly that if Israel attacks Rafah, that it will be a slaughter. He said that more than half of Gaza's population are staring death in the face. 1 million people crammed into Rafah. They have little to eat, hardly any access to medical care, nowhere to sleep, nowhere safe to go. And he said that Palestinians in Gaza are, quote, victims of an assault that is unparalleled in its intensity, brutality, and scope. That is a statement by Martin Griffiths, the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. So while top UN officials are warning of a slaughter in Gaza, while even the top EU foreign policy chief also used the same word, slaughter in Gaza. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is sending more and more weapons to Israel, and the U.S. is vetoing Security Council resolutions allowing Israel to continue massacring civilians, holding the United Nations hostage as an obstacle to the entire international community. Now, finally, the last thing that I'll say here before I conclude is that Israel is not only attacking Gaza, it is also repeatedly bombing its neighbor, Lebanon. And Israel is now carrying out airstrikes deep into Lebanon, not simply on the border, but deep into Lebanon, including in the Gazia area. And Israel is attacking civilian areas, including farm areas. You can find photos and videos of this online. And Lebanese journalists are reporting that this is a massive escalation, and essentially, Israel is trying to start a larger regional war to distract attention away from the investigation into genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. So the situation is very dangerous, but here at Geopolitical Economy Report, I will always be analyzing the situation to help you understand what's going on. I'm Ben Norton, the editor of Geopolitical Economy Report.
Oh. Okay, so I muted the stream because I keep having this feeling that I'm about to sneeze. And it's like the worst feeling when you feel a sneeze coming and then it doesn't come. And you just get left with this half like, you look like that. You know?
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Kate, thanks very much for 5 months of Prime. Thank you for that. No, but I linked the video in the chat, so please do subscribe to Ben's content at the Geopolitical Economy Report. Really, really vital resource. And I hope you support it. Make sure you like the video and everything. Folks, we're only 10 subs away from the goal. We're only 10 subs away from the goal, folks. So if you can, please subscribe. Please subscribe. It's the only way that I'm able to do the kind of commentary and analysis and journalism that I do on here each and every day is if people subscribe. It would be wonderful to get to the good old sub goal today. In fact, if I get there, I'm considering doing a little bit of hell diving. I'm strongly considering doing a little bit of hell diving. Ugh, excuse me. It would completely own Rob if we made him sing on Serious Journalism Day. It really would. It really would. I would be owned and humiliated. That's right. We can take another look at this Al Jazeera thing about the U.S. argument at the ICJ.
And there we've been listening to the U.S. State Department's acting legal advisor, Richard C. Vicek.
Just waiting for that 10 gift sub alert. I know it's coming. I know people won't let me down today. Absolutely not. Obviously not.
Who was addressing
just
the
waiting on
International
it's
Court
more of a
of
question
Justice
of when,
at
if
The Hague on
not
day
if.
3 of public hearings into the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories, which has lasted for nearly 6 decades. We heard the US there warning the court against issuing an advisory that would jeopardize the established UN framework for what he calls lasting peace. He said such as the immediate withdrawal of Israel without addressing Israeli security needs within the Palestinian territories. Let's bring in Marwan Bashara now. He's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst to discuss this further. Good to have you here, Marwan. You said earlier that you expected the US to defend Israel when it was indefensible. Do you think that's what it did?
Yes, but in a very, very clever way. This is the kind of thing you would expect from a superpower, right? And this is the time when it's anything but vulgar, right? I mean, it's very sober, very clever, and very sophisticated argument. It just doesn't make it any less absurd and any less dishonest, right? The overall message of the American representative is that the court should be at the service of the American-Israeli negotiation strategy. Not that the American-Israeli negotiation strategy should abide by the court ruling.
When it was talking about the UN resolutions that had already been passed, you mean? The framework that exists?
When he said that, when he emphasized that all of this is subject to the framing of the negotiations, not that, for example, what at the heart of these sessions is for the court to say whether the occupation is legal or illegal. Which brings me to the second point. Why should the court ruling that the occupation is illegal be any cumbersome, be any burden on the American-Israeli negotiations? Why? I mean, because otherwise it should be legal? It's illegal. I mean, and the question here is that it's not a a question of few years, few months, few weeks. It's been going on for 56 years. And here comes a bit of the dishonesty. Yes, the American position has been, under Trump, later on Biden, at least, right, the past 8 years, whereby America, for example, accepted Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, a Syrian-occupied territory. So it's not true that America does not accept the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force, because it recognized Israel's annexation of the Golan and recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which later on President Trump said, I relieved you, Israel, from this whole issue of Jerusalem. Right? Now we, America, recognized your annexation of Jerusalem, de facto. So in fact, the United States did take a good number of steps that are in utter violations of international law. And then there's this whole ambiguity about the settlements. Of course, the United States, historically speaking, has taken the position that transferring one's population to an occupied territory, as Israel has done over the years, is illegal. But then it started to become more and more and more ambiguous, so much so that in latter years, it basically accepted them as de facto. It accepted the settlements block as de facto and asked the Palestinians, demanded that the Palestinians swap territory because they must leave those settlements in place. And for me,
whenever you see the map of like the proposed Palestinian state, for people that still take the two-state solution seriously, like that's still a possibility. Like it is really amazing to see the proposed map of like territories, just like this like complex spider web shape of land, just completely dotted with now stolen territory. And we really sit there and expect, even though we acknowledge that, like in Canada and the U.S., we acknowledge that's been illegal. Building all these settlements, it's been illegal the whole time that they've been doing it. We've been saying they better stop this pretty soon, or else we might have to have some very difficult conversations about it. And we never do. It's been years and years of this, and then we still have to be like, we still say, oh, I believe in a two-state solution. Like it's absolutely preposterous. Hey, Arnaldo, how's it going? Like that map is just incredible.
From all the legal issues that I am not exactly versed in, because I'm just basically commenting on the politics of the American presentation, is probably the most important underlining issue in this whole thing, right? And why Israel justifies its occupation, why America accepts Israel's justification for its occupation. And what we've heard here said, I think probably a dozen times, Israel's security.
Right to defend itself.
You put it twice on
These
the
settlements
question, right,
make Israel less secure. They make people in Israel less safe.
Who defines Israel's security? Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel says Israel's security can only be guaranteed if it takes charge on all the territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which means any future Palestinian state that Mr. whoever his name is talks about is actually going to be under Israeli control. Hence, the American representative doesn't even mention the end of occupation, that the erection, the establishment of the Palestinian state requires ending the occupation. He doesn't even talk about that. Dismantling of the settlements, for example, defining the borders on the 1967.
It's the South Africa apartheid model of creating Bantustans still under the administration of Israel. Yeah, right. It's just not going to fly. It's a totally non-starter.
Quite sophisticated, quite clever, quite sober, right? But quite
like Netanyahu and the Israeli officials are openly saying there was not going to be a two-state solution.
This is the world's court. The world's court cannot...
They would view any idea of an actual Palestinian state that had any legitimacy whatsoever or power, they would view that as being a threat to their security and their safety. It's a total non-starter for Israeli leadership, and it always has been. Which makes it all the more ridiculous when their own allies in the West are sitting there talking like that's maybe still a possibility.
At the disposition...
Why do we keep having ethno-states?
American Pax Americana, of American-Israeli negotiation tactics.
It's our solution to everything. Why don't we just make another ethno-state?
Because of the 51 countries presenting arguments, only America and Fiji will be arguing against the illegal occupation. So let's...
Fiji.
arguing against the idea of an illegal occupation. So let's see what happens there. Marwan, for the moment, thank you very much.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. Man. It's crazy making. All of this stuff is absolutely crazy making. I can never get over that Israel, if they wanted the country to be Israel, should and could have included the Palestinians in their national project and theirs, but Zionists couldn't stomach racial mixing, so here we are. They have no one to blame but themselves for why they're rightfully hated. Yeah, just like America and Canada don't have anyone else to blame around ourselves for that as well. Around the world, people around the world view us as violent, racist colonialists, and they're correct to do so. You know, it's not fucking surprising why people view us this way. It's not surprising where there's countries that are actively trying to finally undermine our ability to totally, fully control, financially and economically and culturally, fully control the entire world. Okay, I got one more video, and then I started a little bit earlier, so I got one more video, and then I think I'm going to think about saying goodbye.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Leaders at this year's African Union Summit in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, have condemned Israel's assault on Gaza and called for its immediate end. The chair of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, on Saturday said Israel's offensive was, quote, the most flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, and accused Israel of having, quote, exterminated Gaza's residents. Meanwhile, Azali Assoumani, president of the Comoros and the outgoing chairperson of the African Union, praised the case brought by South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice, where the court ruled there's plausible case that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. During last year's AU summit, an Israeli delegate was removed from the plenary hall amidst a disagreement over Israel's observer status at the African Union. For more, we're joined by Nanjala Nyabola, a writer and political analyst from Kenya, joining us from London. Thank you so much for being with us, Nanjala. If you can start off on Gaza, this meeting this past weekend in Ethiopia, where you even had Lula, the president of Brazil, coming to address the group and saying that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza, whereupon Israel's prime minister said that Lula is persona non grata in Israel. But talk about the significance of the meeting on Gaza, and then we'll move on to other issues.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Amy. I think it's important to understand that the African Union as a bloc has been a consistent supporter of Palestinian rights since 1972 and arguably since 1948. Many of African nations see
Chad, yes.
similarities between, and they see really an identical experience between Palestinian occupation and what they have endured as under colonization. And so there's a lot of empathy there, and there's a lot of resonance there. It's important, though, to distinguish the position of the African Union from the position of individual member states. So while the Union itself has been consistent and has always held the line that Palestinian independence was an integral part of the African Union's foundational documents and foundational position in international relations, various African nations, because there is no impetus from the African Union for there to be always a single position within each country, various African nations do have different relationships with both Israel and Palestine. So, for example, while every single country in Africa except one recognizes the state of Palestine, the recognition of the state of Israel has varied. There was a time in after the 1972 war where African nations wholesale declared that they would not recognize the state of Israel, but that has changed considerably. Similarly, in relation to the African Union itself, the Palestinian territories have had observer status at the African Union since 2013. And so you mentioned how the Israeli representative of the to the African Union was asked to leave the meeting of the African Union in 2012 22. This is really because there's been a lot of back and forth about whether or not the African Union as a body should recognize Israel as a observer. Observers do not get to vote, obviously, on various issues that are before the African Union, but they do get to participate in meetings, and they do get to contribute to conversations in some ways. And so it is an important thing to be an observer at the African Union, and Israel has made significant diplomatic inroads in this regard. But the position of the African Union as which is the head of states, the meeting of the head of states is the most senior decision-making entity within the African Union, as opposed to the Commission, which oversees the day-to-day running of the organization. The position of the African Union heads of states has always been that Israel did not have that observer status, and this was the back and forth, that the Commission had taken an action that the Union itself had not endorsed, and this is why the Israeli representative was asked to leave. This remains a position of contention, and the increase of the violence in Gaza has only made it clear that the African Union is going to remain with the historical position, which is recognition of the Palestinian territories and a demand that there is adherence to international law on the issue of Palestine, and that includes the occupation. Predates October 7th, goes all the way back to every single UN resolution that has been passed on the issue to date. That's the official African Union position, and what we've seen in this last week is a reinforcement of that position, a reification of that position.
Nanjala Nyabola, you've spoken in the past about
it gives me hope
Namibia,
as well,
which
Arnaldo.
before Palestine was the last country where international
really
law
inspiring.
on occupation was tested. South Africa occupied Namibia until 1994. What were the lessons here, and how did they shape the knowledge of the terrain of occupation and its impact on people being occupied?
Well, it's really been one of the most interesting developments in international relations in relation to Gaza, is that we're finally seeing this recollection of the fact that African connection with Palestine is not a new thing, and there's been a long history of solidarity and support with liberation movements, particularly the ANC in South Africa and SWAPO in Namibia. So as you mentioned, Namibia was an occupied territory, was occupied by the apartheid government of South Africa until 1994. And SWAPO and the ANC both worked together to end that occupation, but also collaborated with the Palestinian Liberation Authority, Palestinian Liberation Organization, to try and coordinate whether it was political support at the international level, which was a crucial element of ending that, but also through the trusteeship mechanism. Namibia was under the UN trusteeship Commission, through the trusteeship mechanism, trying to find ways of negotiating independence for Namibia and protecting Namibia from further South African incursions. South African apartheid government's relationship with its neighbors was always fraught. There were frequent bombing campaigns that happened in Botswana. There was fighting in Mozambique and in Namibia, and so there was always this tension between the apartheid government and governments in the region. And so Palestine in that regard becomes a natural ally, because that experience of occupation is very similar. And so when we saw at the ICJ this week,
Oppressed and colonized people showing solidarity with one another. This is what we can't have.
Of the fact that SWAPO and ANC have always been allies of Palestinian liberation. And what we're seeing with this Palestinian reinforcement of international law is not a new occurrence. It's something that South Africa and Namibia both learned keenly through the process of fighting for independence and the end of apartheid, and they would like to see it replicated in the way the Palestinian issue is handled at the international level. And that is, once again, this is what stick to the letter of the law, because this law exists for a reason, and this law came through for Namibia. Can it provide the same protection for Palestinian people?
Very interesting that at the International Court of Justice yesterday,
acting surprised
in
at
the
DPRK
six-day
supporting
hearing
Palestine.
that's taking place,
Just
where
look at the
more than a
DPRK's
quarter
foreign
of
policy.
the UN's countries,
Over the last several
it's
decades, they've
the
supported
largest
every
gathering
anti-colonial
ever, will
struggle.
be speaking against Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. Namibia spoke, of course, South Africa, which has brought this other case around the genocide case against Israel, and also you have the U.S. vetoing the UN UN
Which side
Security
I
Council
wonder which side
resolution
Israel was on
yesterday
during
for a
South African
ceasefire that was
apartheid.
brought
Very
by
interesting question.
Algeria, a country that was
Should look into
occupied
that.
by France by more than a century. Nanjala, if you could address that and then move on to the DRC and the issues raised there around the warring that's going on in eastern Congo, and particularly around Rwanda's role with the M23.
I would like to start learning more and talking more about this. I do feel like it's something that I've not spent enough time talking about.
Diplomatically at the international
Congo right
level,
now.
African countries are the most cohesive voting bloc, certainly at the United Nations, but in other international forums. And this is because, again, as I mentioned, the African Union mechanisms for deliberation are actually incredibly strong. When there is an African line on an issue, there's a lot of negotiation that precedes that, but countries tend to vote by the line, and there tends to be very much a consistent diplomatic front. And this is one reason why Israel, for example, has tried very hard to make inroads with the diplomatic community in Africa, because on all of the votes that have come down the General Assembly that have consistently criticized Israel, even at the Security Council, anything that's managed to get through that has criticized Israel, African countries have consistently voted in favor of these resolutions. And so there is actually this bigger issue of numbers. You know, we tend to think about power in international relations in terms of military strength and in terms of financial strength. But what Africa has at the international level is just sheer numbers. We're talking about 54 countries that have a very interconnected view of history and tend to work together and cooperate together and bring those numbers together for all of these international votes. And so Algeria is a big country on the continent, even though it might not seem that way externally. But Algeria has been one of the most consistent defenders of Palestinian liberation on the continent, came out very strongly against Israeli diplomatic presence at the AU, came out very strongly in favor of Palestinian independence and supporting the Palestinian liberation organizations. And so it's not a surprise to see that Algeria at the Security Council would take this very strong position, because it is very consistent with Algerian diplomatic history. And as you said, it is because Algeria has endured several
This is some guy,
decades
Rob Russo,
of
some
French
leftist based in
occupation that culminated
Canada.
in one of the
I
most-
was
one of the
turned on
most
to this
violent-
sick individual, and I found this.
Al Muft. Hello, thanks for the raid. Welcome in. The reason they're doing all this is it existentially threatens all colonial countries from an international legal perspective. De-dollarization makes decolonization an inevitability because their only means to stop and block these national movements, other than economic sanctions, is all-out war. Yeah, that's a really good point, Kenny. I mean, it's one of the things that I mentioned, that it does feel like this effort on the part of South Africa, Algeria, and these other formerly like colonized nations to take this case, it doesn't feel like it would have been possible, you know, even 10 or 15 years ago, when there's less of this kind of like unipolar Western dominated US hegemony international situation. All of a sudden it's a totally different situation. The US empire is on the decline. There's now this like these new international institutions popping up. And I think it's given a sort of comfort to South Africa and other countries that they can stand up and do the right thing in these moments, and they don't have to worry as much about being targeted or sanctioned or destabilized by America. So I think that's one of the reasons that I really support that ongoing process. I agree, B-Rat. It's a fuck the IMF for me as well.
Wars of independence that we've really ever seen globally. And, you know, France is still in the process of trying to make reparations for this, because for Algerians it remains a very sore spot in history, and it remains to be a very, you know, fraught question between Franco-Algerian relationships. So I'm not surprised to see Algeria bring this resolution forward, just like, you know, as you've probably heard from American analysts, you know, it was not a surprise that the UN voted, even though it was a disappointment that the US voted in the way that it did. And I think we're going to expect to see a lot more coordinated action being led by nations like Algeria, South Africa. All of these countries that have historically supported Palestinian liberation in Africa will continue to toe this line, because it is not just a question of it's a question of history, it's a question of solidarity, it's a question of shared experiences of all of these systemic types of violence.
And Nanjala, we only have less than a minute left, but I wanted to ask you about all of the heightened anti-colonial sentiment that has swept across Central Africa and the Sahel region, with numerous coups in the region in recent years. How has this affected the dynamics at the AU?
It's definitely complicated things, and there's probably three things that I would point out. One is that this is not happening in a vacuum. We are also feeling the secondary effects of the ongoing war in Ukraine, Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. The Sahel region has historically attracted a great deal of attention because it has been the crossroads of trade between Africa and Europe, but it's also been, in contemporary history, the main pathway through which migrants from as far afield as Bangladesh, but also from the continent, cross the Mediterranean to get into southern Europe. So in terms of international diplomacy, it's attracted a great deal of attention from Europe. There's a great deal of financing for migration management. There's a great deal of financing for ending wars that have happened in the region. At the same time, you have this young generation. Remember that Africa is the youngest continent in the world. You have this young generation, many of these cool leaders.
Nanjala, we're going to have to wrap there,
young.
but we're going to continue and post online at democracynow.org. Nanjana Nubola, speaking to us from London. I'm Amy Goodman with One.
They gave her they played her off. They did the whole Oscars thing. Oh. Well, folks, I don't know. I've been on for about 3 hours here. This has been a great day. It was fantastic to talk to Sarah JAMA. If I want to get to the sub goal, I should probably just stick around longer. But I got to say, I got a little case of the 3 p.m. sleepies. I was up late last night. I'm actually in pain right now. I have some pain issues and had a hard time sleeping last night because of it. And I got not a lot of sleep. And I'm quite sleepy right now. Drink a Monster. Unfortunately, I don't have one right now. I should have picked one up today. I really should have done that. Don't forget to drink water. I've been trying to do that. I've been doing that. Take a Napsy Doodle edible. I might. I'm also thinking about playing Helldivers as well. I'm also considering playing Helldivers. We will see. But folks, if you can, please subscribe to the show that you're watching right now. If you can, please subscribe. I got 10 more subs to go. This has been a great episode. It was really cool to put on my serious journalism outfit today and do an actual political interview with someone who works in politics. I thought it was really fantastic. And if you want to support the work that I do on here, I do this show each and every day, 3-4 hours a day. I'm happy to do it. I love to do it. But the only way that I'm able to continue doing this show every single day is if people subscribe to TRRS. As you know, I must make the little number go up every single day.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
My goodness gracious. Risk Inverse, thanks for 5 gifted subs. That's very, very kind of you. Thank you, Risk Inverse. And if anyone else wants to support TRRS,
you've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Golly gee whiz. Look at that. Drometheus. Very first 5 gifted subs in the channel from our new friend, Drometheus. Thank you,
You've just
Drometheus.
become an elite member of the Friendship
gracious.
Triangle.
Oh, my. Drometheus, thanks for another 5 gifted subs. That is very, very kind of you, and I appreciate it a lot. And this is the beautiful thing about the Friendship Triangle system. You know, you might tune into this show and you're like a new viewer, you're a new chatter, and you say to yourself, "How? Like, it seems like it's pretty easy to join the Friendship Triangle system. How do you get to the very top of that, though, to the elite tier? That must be a huge investment in both time, money, energy. It must be a huge investment to get to that elite tier." Not true. Not true. It's actually super easy. with a gift of 5 gifted subs or above. It puts you right up to the elite tier right away, even if you just got to the community like this month. Even if you're just a 1 month subscriber, 2 or 3 months, totally new to the whole community, instantly rocket right up to that elite tier of the Friendship Triangle system. That's Twitch's only 2-dimensional triangle-shaped friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. It's not a pyramid scheme right now. That's why it's a triangle, okay? It's not a pyramid. It's a triangle. It's 2-dimensional. 2-dimensional. Definitionally, it can't be a pyramid scheme. It's 2-dimensional. Or like a triangle plan. Yeah, Dr. Maggot, no way, I'm getting out of here.
Use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
I've had so much clout trickle down to me thanks to the Friendship Triangle system. Thanks,
Good.
Rob.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for the 200 bits. The triangle may be 2D, but the chess is 4D. That's right. Good. That's right, I am Dr. Maggot. I took a hot soapy shower on my trickle-down clout the other day. Oh my. Oh my goodness. That's right, a lot of misinfo out there. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from Putin? We don't know. We just don't know. It could be, but it's 2-dimensional. Yeah, I'm getting out of here before more people subscribe and I have to sing because I really don't want to have to do that. I do. It's really cool that people do support the show. Obviously, I need that. I'm getting out of here before anyone else owns me by subscribing even more and making me sing a song. So, I don't know if I've ever seen Rob this sleepy. I feel like I'm always sleepy. But we're at 2:37 now. Yeah, I may be back to do so. We'll see if I have time. I'll take a little rest. I may come back in like half an hour or so for a brief gaming session. We'll see. Either way, I'll be logging in later tonight anyways.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Dimitri, thank you for the 200 bits. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dimitri. He doesn't exactly need the viewers. I'm going to raid Central Committee. I heard he was looking at my TikTok today. It would be nice if maybe that was reciprocated sometime. I don't know. It would be nice if that could be reciprocated ever. We'll see. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks again to Sarah JAMA for coming to talk to me. I think it's really cool that, and I in fact feel very proud that, I was able to provide her with a little platform to tell her side of that story. So I thought that was really fantastic. It was a really good conversation. Anyway, that's all from me for today, friends. Goodbye.